Hey guys, welcome back. It's your favorite Gimp with Limp, and I'm back with some more Under an Iron Sky. I know you guys are definitely excited for this, and so am I. This is actually going to be a little addendum to the movement that we talked about in the previous video. Recording this, and it's probably not going to be its own video. I'm probably just going to tack it onto the beginning of combat, and I'll just film combat here in a little bit, and we'll go over that stuff. But I wanted to touch on something that Fabrizio had pointed out in the previous video. All right, so we were talking about movement, and Fabrizio had pointed out that I missed some of the aspects when it came to movement for this game. So looking at our little scenario booklet here. Now, these rules are in the scenario booklet, not in the main rule booklet itself. And I had ignored these because I thought they applied only to the campaign and not the scenario. So when you're looking at the scenario booklet, there's something like 4 or 5 smaller scenarios, and then there's the big campaign where you've got the whole map, which is just so friggin' awesome, covering the whole damn table. And I didn't think this turn 0 movement. So there's movement that happens before the game officially starts. And I did not think that applied in my scenario. So I didn't worry about it. Didn't even bother to read it. It does apply in my scenario, the tension period as well. So we're just going to quickly go over this because it would have changed a lot here, because none of these units necessarily would be in their starting locations because you do get to move them potentially. So looking at it very quickly here, the tension period, which is what we would start in, these rules are in effect until Warsaw Pact starts hostilities. No unit can enter enemy or neutral countries. No unit can attack enemy units or installations. Zones of control do not extend beyond borders. Neither player may attempt to bridge demolition, so blow up a bridge. And only French units may enter French territory. That would probably be the first time in history that's ever happened, because enemy units always enter French territory. All their rifles never fired, dropped once. Anyway, turn 0 movement. That's the part I really wanted to focus on. So it talks about that Warsaw Pact could declare war at turn 1, which is the basic gist of what I was going for in my little examples. And the following rules simulate the minimum preparation period for both sides should a war erupt right from the start. So after setup, so what we're seeing here, this is all set up. All these units are set up just according to the scenario booklet. We would have had this step happen where the Warsaw Pact player may move any Soviet ground unit up to a maximum of 20 points. They might also move helicopter squadrons up to the maximum movement allowance. They're still going to have to be on a helipad somewhere, but they can move. And you can also execute transport missions, so move, units around using your helicopters. After the Warsaw Pact has done its turn 0 movement, NATO player can move US, British, West German, or Canadian ground units up to a maximum of 10 movement points. So not as much as the Warsaw Pact. They get 20, NATO gets 10. And then after that, NATO player can move some of their helicopters, depending on their nationality, up to their movement allowance. And again, they can do transport missions as well. And again, all that is in effect with the tension period stuff as well. So this is all movement that could have happened. Now, there's also some rules for, let me flip this around, some turn 1 movement restrictions. So at the start of the Warsaw Pact land movement phase, turn 1, all Pact allies ground units are considered to have already expended 10 movement points to assemble and organize. So that wouldn't affect us too much because I think it's just Soviet units. No, that would affect the East German units. And then the NATO land movement turn phase, all of those nations, Austrian, Belgian, Danish, Dutch, French, and Italian, and Luxembourg ground units are considered to have already expended 10 movement points. So our East German guys, I think, are the only ones who would be affected by this. Now, to not change things up too terribly much, We're going to not worry about the surprise rules, so I can kind of focus more on the actual examples of play. But make sure you eyeball this when you're playing your own game, so you are paying attention to the turn 0, 1, and turn 0, turn 1, and surprise movement rules. So what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do off camera, is I'm going to go ahead and do some more movement. I'm going to leave my examples probably just where they're at, just not to have to worry about it too terribly much, so I can show you guys. But I am going to have the Warsaw Pact move some units around, maybe bring some helicopters up. Now, since this is turn 0 movement, I'm adjusting for the fact that I did miss this portion. These air supremacy zones are not going to come into play when we're moving those helicopters, although we're not flying into enemy countries, so it shouldn't be a big issue anyway. I don't think that would matter too much, but again, we're not going to worry about this. So these two where NATO has control and the Soviets down over here. But it would give me a chance to move a good chunk of these Soviet units up. And I'm going to do some finagling. Again, I don't recommend watching me necessarily for strategy. I'm not exactly a tactical genius. I know you point the weapon at the enemy and pull the trigger. That's about it. But we are going to move some units around. Maybe brings this mechanized unit down over here. These panzers. Now they're mechanized because there's crossroads here. There's crossroads here. And the general principle of this scenario is that the Soviets are trying to come down over here and get into Frankfurt, try and take this town, this big city over here. And to move their units with any real speed, they want to use that Autobahn. They want to get those roads. So if we can kind of block the roads here, maybe down over here, but mainly these two areas here, block them up a little bit, should be able to slow them down. So I'm going to do some movement off camera. I'm going to bring some of these units up, bring these guys around, kind of focus them. Do the same thing over here, bring these guys around. But it'll do a good thing for me because it'll allow me to get units into certain places. And just keep in mind, because when this video picks back up, I'm going to go into the combat play examples. And there's a lot to cover with that, all right? I might even break that down into a couple videos, just depending on how long it takes me. So I'm going to move units to give me good examples, right? Not necessarily ways to play the best, but ways that I can show what I'm trying to show you guys the best. I'm going to focus on standard combat, but we are going to touch on the other things like single echelon and column and all that other good stuff. But there's a lot of different little aspects that can come into play when it comes to combat in this game. The different types of units that are involved, their strengths, what type of mode they're in, whether or not you're committing any air assets into it, whether or not you have artillery that can be committed into it. So I'm probably going to show like an example without artillery, just run through the basics, and then show an example of running with artillery. Although I'm kind of rambling right now because I'm probably going to touch on this when I film the rest of this tomorrow. But I'm thinking this is going to be a good one here because I've got a big mechanized Soviet unit here, and they've got some artillery right there under them that I can bring in with them right along this road, and that can get me into a good spot where I can get some combat going over here to show you guys. So for me, this is going to be like a day in between I'm filming this, but for you guys, you're going to be seeing combat right now. And boom, just like that, we're back into combat. For me, a lot of times passed, but for you guys, it was like that. You guys will obviously notice that a lot of units have been moved on the board. I went ahead and did that turn 0 movement that we were just talking about. Adjusted a whole lot of places where guys were, kind of knuckled up the American forces and the West German forces to kind of surround Frankfurt, get a little defensive type position going on, just like I was talking about, try to hold on to some of these crossroads up here, and then set myself up with a nice, easy example for combat, you know, just straight, plain example. And then over here, didn't move too much of the Soviet forces. I kind of moved them down along this road into the Autobahn where they can continue a nice little chain as they push in, put a few air units out there, mix them around a little bit to extend some air coverage out just in case the NATO forces tried to come in, but I don't think they're going to be worrying too much about that because this is more defensive on NATO's end in this scenario versus the Soviets, who are very much the aggressor. All right, so there's a lot going on when it comes to combat. A lot of little modifiers, a lot of things that can go back and forth. Like I was telling you guys before, when you initiate combat, there's so many different things that you have to concern yourself with when it comes to the movement points, the fatigue points, the terrain, obviously, all that basic stuff that you would normally expect to have in a hex encounter type war game. But you're also going to have to worry about the fact that you do have the option to add in ground support or artillery support. Helicopter missions can be added in. So that's why the non-phasing player can't just sit on the laurels and just wait, because the offensive player does have the ability to decide, hey, I want to do a ground strike mission with this combat. And he would declare X amount of planes coming in, to bomb, to escort. And then you would have an opportunity to send your own interceptors in to try to stop them. So there is a little back and forth there that you got to pay attention to. Now, we're not going to cover all of that. I'm going to break it down into bite-sized chunks, kind of the way the rulebook does. So since this video has already been taken up partly with the movement stuff I had to touch on, we're going to just get into some basics of combat, just the modifiers and how you're going to initiate it, and then show a little bit of artillery, since I've got some artillery right here in this example. And then we'll show in the next video how a ground strike would work, because that's pretty much a video in of itself, but it'll show you enough of how air power works that I can kind of cover two birds with one stone, So let's start by looking here, and we're going to start with this nice big Soviet mechanized unit here. They're going to be pushing in along the autobahn, and I stuck this guy out on his own, right? He's stuck there defending the bridge, sacrificial offering, if you will, just so I could get easy combat ratios, okay? Now, this mechanized unit is stacked with an artillery unit. And then we also have another artillery unit over here that is West German. I'm going to touch on those here in a sec, but keep them in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep him in tactical mode, so he's not changing his road mode. He's got his... Wait. All right. One more thing to keep in mind. There are the turn 1 rules. I'm not worrying about them for examples of play, because for the majority of the play, you're not going to be worrying about turn 1 rules. Just make sure you keep in mind those turn 1 rules and surprise rules that I mentioned earlier in the video. All right. So understand, I'm ignoring them for my examples, but know they exist. Okay. So he's got 20 movement points to use. Tactical mode. We're on the road. It's going to be 2 movement points. Boom. He moves here. This unit is extending a zone of control. I do believe I'm correct over that. He shouldn't be extending it across like these hexes, since they're not bridged, but this is bridged. So I do believe he extends his zone of control over there. So entering that zone of control, all right, means that you have to stop and initiate combat against all units that are exerting a zone of control over the hex that you've entered. So the Soviets have to stop and conduct the attack. The attack requires an expenditure of 4 movement points. So this unit has spent a total of 6 movement points by moving here, because they are required to conduct this attack. Now, just to show you guys here in the rulebook real quick, there's a whole sequence that you're going to follow when it comes to resolving combat, because there's a lot of different things that can come into play. Right off the bat, it's the type of combat. Now, for our example, we're going to use standard, but we'll touch later on column, assault from march, single echelon, assault, or disengagement. So understand there's way more than just one type of combat. So it's not just you move in the hex, you roll the dice, and call it a day. You have just the types of combat is the first thing you got to worry about, and there's a lot of differences that come into play with this. All right, any chemical attacks, that's going to be one of those special rules, optional rules. We're not using that, but understand it is one of the things that can be used in this. Determines the supply status. Both of these units are going to be in supply, but there are embedded rules that can come into play. So if you're going with the deeper supply rules, that's something that has to be paid attention to. Attacking and defending players commit electronic warfare units. We're not going to commit any for this basic assault. Defending player declares the type of defense. Now, this is NATO. They have the ability to declare an active defense. It gives them a combat modifier by doing so, but it also does give the chance, a higher chance for them to incur a penalty. That is something, or a step loss rather. That is something that is only available to NATO. They do have the ability to decide to do that. You can commit air mobile battalions, so basically you can bring in extra support. Attacking player commits artillery and resolves seed and ground support missions. So those are the air missions that we were just talking about, and artillery support. And the defending player is going to do the same. So now looking back at this, look at how the hexes are spaced out, okay? So this artillery unit could have moved up with this attacking unit, but he didn't, because he doesn't have to, okay? The artillery units, if you're attacking, can support from up to a couple of hexes away. So 1, 2, boom. He's within range to provide his support number to it. Now, when you're looking at it, that first number is the attacking support. So if you're attacking, you're going to use that first number. If you're defending, you're going to use that last number, which happens to be 5. So it wouldn't make a difference on this one. But the West Germans do have an artillery unit of their own. Here's the problem, though. They are out of range. When it comes to defending, you do not have the same rules applied. The defending player's artillery has to either be adjacent or in the same hex as the unit that's being attacked. So if this artillery unit were here, they could add their firepower to the attack and support this unit. But since they are here, they were 1 hex too far away, they can't add that. So that's something you do have to keep in mind in this game, is the position of your artillery is going to matter. If they were just a bit closer, they would get to add that 3 to the combat and help out this tank unit, this panzer unit that's here getting ready to get overrun by this overwhelming Soviet unit. But instead, it's going to be a combat factor of 20. So we're adding the 5 to the 15, that first number, because remember, our first number is our attack strength. The middle letter is if they have any innate flak defense, air defense. So they have an innate air defense of a B rating. And then that last number is their defensive combat modifier. So 5 plus the 15 gives them a 20. And then just a strength of 4 here on the defense on their far right number. All right, so continuing on, looking at how this sequence is going to play out. We committed this, and the way I'm going to do this later is we're going to redo this combat, and I'm not going to worry about the artillery support, but we'll show a ground support mission, how that would work if we added ground support into it, okay? Attacking and defending players would roll if you commit any electronic warfare. We'll touch on that later. Like I said, the game isn't necessarily hard in and of itself. There's just so many small interlocking moving pieces to keep track of. All right, so your final combat odd is calculated by comparing the total combat value, which we were just doing, to the total defense value and expressing that defensive value as a ratio. And it can give you extra combat modifiers if you're above 7-1 or below 1-2. It'll either be in the attacker or defender's favor, whichever way the odds are going. For us, we know very easily with a 20-4, that's a 5-1 combat odd. So it's pretty easy to know the numbers on what we're going to have. Final combat modifications are calculated, and the die is rolled by the phasing player on the combat results table. Now, there are a few things on the other side here talking about supply and the air squadrons, the fact that they go back to their used side if they have been used. We're not using them in this first example, but we will in the second. So let's grab up our player aid here. Here is our combat results table. All right, so this is the table that we're going to be rolling on, and we're going to be rolling on this 5-to-1. But we aren't ready to roll just yet because we have to figure out what our combat modifier is actually going to be. Flipping this over. Oh, wait, that's the movement. I got to flip it over the other way. My apologies. Flipping it over this way, we can see these are all the combat modifiers that could come into play, and I'll be damned, there's a lot. All right, so we're going to have the basic ones that you're going to be used to. So like terrain or the fatigue, you know, things like that can come into play. What type of movement mode, if they're in hedgehog or if they're road mode, if they're rationing, chemical warfare, all this good stuff. And then you see A's and D's over here. So if it's used by the attacker or defender, and again, I love how they have it referenced in the manual here. Makes it so easy to look it up in case you're curious about what it is. For us, the only combat modifier we're actually going to have to worry about is the cadre rating. Nothing else is actually going to apply in this first thing. We're not going to worry about using an active defense. For this, we're leaving electronic warfare out. We're just going with the basics just so we can kind of get some numbers on the board. All right, so cadre rating. So it's plus the friendly cadre rating. Hope I'm saying that right. Your rating is showed over here on the right. There's the initials for all the nations. And we see for West Germany, and I think that's West Germany and West Germany Reserve. I think I'm right on that. But we're going to be using 5. So West Germany has a 5. And the Soviet units, depending on their category, this is a category 1 unit. So they get a 4. Okay, so 4 to 5. That's where we're at as far as those modifiers. Now to determine where you're going to roll here, you're going to take the defender's number and you're going to subtract the attacker's number. And that's going to tell you what row you're going to do. Okay, so your column up here is your combat ratio. So the total combat strength, the difference, that's where you're getting to this. And then the difference in those modifiers, defender minus attacker, determines this. So the attacker wants to have a high modifier so he can get to this higher negative number, because the higher up it is, the better it is for the attacker. The lower it is, the better it is for the defender. Again, we understand that our ratings, our cadre ratings, are going to be the only thing that's doing it. That's going to be a difference of 1 in the favor of the defenders. So we're just going to be rolling on the 1 row way over here in 5-to-1. So when we do it, we're going to roll our D20, and this is going to determine it. We're either going to get a D, a C, or an A1 result, just depending on our number rolled. And then over here, this is actually relatively simplistic. I like how this works. As complicated as this game is, the combat itself, the results are relatively easy to understand. A1, lose 1 step. A2, 2 steps, and those for the attackers. C, it's a whiff, but the attack must stop, because remember, you can keep attacking depending on how much fatigue you have, right? So we still have fatigue points left to spend, and that's where some of the real genius, I think, comes from this game, is the fact that you do have that set amount, but it is variable because you can stress your units. I'd like to think that simulates pushing through the night, not giving your guys enough sleep and rest and food, but you've got a good momentum going and you want to push it. So you might do good by taking advantage of that breakthrough that you've got, right? But your units start to take some bad modifiers because they're tired, they're hungry, or they're worn out, whatever it is. All right, so C, we'll stop it. No losses, attacker must stop. And D, defender must lose 1 step or retreat. Retreat is an option, but retreat is not free here because it does open up the ability to have a breakthrough, and the unit that retreats loses their zone of control when they retreat. So that's something that you got to decide. If you don't want to lose steps, yeah, you don't want to lose your steps. But when you're retreating, you're effectively creating holes in your lines that the attacker is going to be able to exploit because you no longer exert that zone of control. Okay, so one last look here. This is where our units are. We're going to go ahead and roll our D20. We're on 1 for, and we'll roll our red one since this is for the Soviet attack. The 1 row of the 5 to 1 column. All right, no big number, low number for the Soviets here. 1. That's going to be a low number. That's definitely in their wheelhouse. So showing what we've got here, we are right here, 0, 1 to 10. D is the result. So that's going to be defender must lose 1 step or retreat. Now, pay attention over here, because this is something I could see myself easily forgetting in this game, and that is the cadre rating. If you roll a 4 to a 16 on the die roll, the units lose their original cadre rating, and you flip them to show their new cadre rating, which is generally going to be higher unless there's something like a special forces unit. And see, what that's supposed to represent is the fact that, so like your run-of-the-mill soldiers, just normal troops, a lot of them won't have a whole lot of combat experience when World War III ticks off. So their cadre rating will just be their training. But as they get combat experience, their ability is going to go up. So their cadre rating actually will bump up to a 5, signifying their experience. But when it's specialized special forces like Marines or Spec Ops teams, those guys, they actually have their cadre rating go down rather than up, because you're losing the special units, the highly trained guys. They're being killed in combat, and they're not as easy to replace. So a neat way for them to simulate that. We do not have a role in this range, though, so the units are going to keep their original cadre ratings here. Now, let me grab a couple of counters to show how this is going to work over here on the board, depending on the choice that we make. So, units have a set number of steps, depending on their sizes. Most combat units, I think, have 3 steps, depending on their size. I think battalions have like 2 steps. So, your division or regiment size have 3 steps. Battalions have 2. A lot of support units have 1. And unlike other games, let me zoom in here a little bit, where you would just flip a unit. So let's flip this guy. You see that his counter hasn't changed, right? That still shows the same numbers that we were just showing, except it has a 5 over there on the right where its location used to be on, where it was supposed to spawn on the board when you were placing it. That is to do with the cadre rating. Well, our cadre rating isn't changing. We can either back him up, right? And if we do that, then a breakthrough gets placed here. These guys automatically have to move up, and then you're going to place one of these counters on this unit to signify the fact that they are no longer exerting a zone of control, right? So they've effectively pushed a breakthrough where they've knocked the enemy back. The enemy's not doing good, and they're kind of taking control, kicking ass and taking names. That is if you choose to retreat. If you choose not to retreat, then instead you would take this casualty counter and place it underneath the unit. So if I can get him picked up, I should be using my tweezers to signify that he has actually incurred a step loss instead. But now you've lost some forces, and they still have fatigue left. They can attack again. You're just going to sit there and keep taking the pounding. So sometimes it might behoove you to back off. Like in this situation, yeah, you back off. Well, now that artillery unit's going to be closer, and they're going to be able to throw their defensive modifier into the combat. So the rating would no longer be a whatever it was, the 5-to-1, because they would be out of range of their artillery and you would be in range of your own artillery. So in this, I think it would actually behoove NATO to take the retreat, let them get the advantage of the breakthrough, but their artillery isn't pushed up with them. Instead, you now have the artillery advantage, so it'd be 15-7. What is that? 2-to-1, right? Instead of the 5-to-1 that they had. So the odds are nowhere near as much in their favor. And maybe then you want to take and do a, the NATO defense thing. The active defense, anyway, that's what I mean on it. So that's your basic gist of combat. That's the standard combat on how it's going to work. But like I said, that's the real basic version of it. There's so much more that can get added in because of the air power, your jets, your helicopters, your air mobile units being able to be dropped in. So it is very much far from just a simple, hey, this is my odds, your odds, roll a die, and keep on going. Especially when you add in the fatigue, the air, all the different types of air, the different types of attacks. This really is like a war game, a war gamer's game, right? There's just so many different aspects of it that you have to keep track of. I can barely keep track of all of it myself. This actually kind of, if you want to equate this to a video game, this one kind of reminds me of the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. And I know some of you guys who've actually played that game are going, what the hell, Gimpy, what are you thinking? But in that one, you took it slow. It was something that you wanted to experience all the little parts of it. You didn't want to race through it. It wasn't just a generic game when you went and just smashed your face into the enemy and bash, bash, bash. You had to think about it. You didn't have quest markers. You had to actually read the text and figure out where you had to go and learn things over time. This game has that feel in a war game, right? I know some of you who haven't played, Morrowind or understand the Elder Scrolls series probably won't get what the hell I'm talking about. But if you have, you'll understand what I mean by that it has that deep feeling that you want to take your time with it. You don't want to race through this. This isn't something that you want to try to crack out as many turns in an hour as you can. You want to take it slow. Think about where you're going with your units. What forces are you committing? What type of attack are you committing? Are you going to exert your forces or not? Do you think he's going to exert his forces? Do I have air superiority? Does he have air superiority? Is it possible for me to snake around some air units behind and help out in a different way? Lots of different little factors just needle into this. All right, but I'm going to stop here because I know I'm rambling on a little bit and I don't want this to get too long. So what we're going to do on the next one is we're going to run this combat again, and I'm going to break it down, bringing in ground support into it, show you guys how that's going to work. We'll take a look at helicopters, we'll take a look at jets, how all that's going to go back and forth because they are handled differently. And again, it's going to interact with everything else that's going on the board because you're not just worrying about this little combat here. You're worrying about the air superiority. If your fighters have to come through or your jets have, your aircraft, I'm thinking about so many things, excuse me. Your helicopters, all the other different things have to come through. You have to worry about that. Then you have to worry about the embedded flak defense that they have and whether or not they end up surviving it. And are they sending escort fighters? And that's actually where we get into the air interception combat table, where there's a lot going on over here. So, like I said, we will touch on that in the next video. I'm trying to, like I said, do it like a little building block where I stack the pieces and add it all slowly together. Please, like I said, feel free to put your questions down below. I know Fabrizio will point out if I miss anything, which is surely bound to happen. And I will definitely touch on that in the next one. I'm going to show you guys also some fan-made player aids that got sent to me. I didn't have time to get them done for this video, but I will show them to you guys that someone was nice enough to send to me in the next video as well. All right, but that's going to be it for this one. You guys take care. I will catch you in the next one.